Random House Audio presents Sleeping with the Devil, How Washington Sold Our Soul for Saudi Crude, by Robert Baer, read for you by Robert O'Keefe. CIA's Publication Review Board has reviewed the manuscript for this book to assist the author in eliminating classified information, and poses no security objection to its publication. This review, however, should not be construed as an official release of information, confirmation of its accuracy, or an endorsement of the author's views. The white Ford pickup rolled quietly to a stop below Tower Number 7, one of 10 large cylindrical structures at Abqaiq that are used to remove sulfur from petroleum, or turn it from sour to sweet in oil patch jargon. To the east, across the Saudi desert, the first hint of the morning sun peeked over the horizon. The truck driver, one of thousands of Shia Muslims who work the Saudi oil fields, cut the engine, checked his watch one last time, and began reciting verses from the Quran memorized long ago. The lights of the world's largest oil processing facility twinkled all around him. 3 hours earlier, a fishing boat, equipped with twin 400-horsepower Evinrude engines, had set out from Deir, on the southern coast of Iran. By dark, the boat had sprinted across the Persian Gulf to the Saudi port at Al-Jubail. From there, the Iranian pilot had crept south, hugging the coastline, until he came in sight of the Sea Island oil loading platform at Ras Tanura, 45 miles to the northeast of Abqaiq. Now, with the water just beginning to glow pink, he pointed the bow at Platform 4 and slammed the throttle to full. Just inland from Ras Tanura, at Khatif Junction, an Egyptian engineer, a Muslim brother who had made the grand tour of militant Islam from Cairo to Tehran, flicked on his flashlight and admired his handiwork. The Semtex was expertly crammed into and around every manifold, every valve, every last pipe junction. It was art, really, lacing it all together in a single charge. West of Abqaiq, in the foothills of the Al-Arama Mountains, at a small Bedouin encampment, a Saudi in his mid-20s bent over a 120mm Russian-made mortar. A Wahhabi brother descended from the religious zealots who had brought the House of Saud to power. He had been trained in munitions in Afghanistan by a man who had first been taught by the Central Intelligence Agency. Below him, at the base of the foothills, sat Pump Station 1, the first stop on the oil pipeline that carried nearly 1 million barrels of extra-light crude daily from Abqaiq across the peninsula to the Red Sea port at Yanbu. A pager vibrated lightly against his chest. It was time. The Al Saud were coming down. The oil that fed their whoring and corruption would flow no more. Islam would be purified, the American devils crippled, their Israeli protectorate cut free to die on its own. Finally, the world would have to take notice, and for the simplest of reasons. The global economy was screwed. I've dolled up the details above and updated them a little, but I didn't invent them. They come courtesy of people who studied the Saudi oil industry from the ground up. From the mid-1930s until well into the 60s, Saudi Arabia was a branch office of America's oil giants, a Republican internationalist's fantasy. The United States remained secure in the fact that Saudi oil would always be there for us, under the sand, cheap and safe as if it were locked up in Fort Knox. We built Saudi Arabia's oil business and got full and easy access to its crude for our efforts. The first OPEC oil embargo in 1973 took the bloom off that rose, but anxiety turned into full panic in the early 80s during the Iran-Iraq War, especially when it looked as if Iran might try to take the war to the Arab side of the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, with the nightmare of an Islamic prairie fire taking down the world's economy. The Abqaiq extra-light crude complex was both the most vulnerable point of the Saudi oil system and the most spectacular target. With a capacity of 7 million barrels, Abqaiq is the Godzilla of oil processing facilities. Generally, the study groups posited a multi-pronged attack on Abqaiq with severe damage to storage tanks and the large spheroids used to reduce pressure on oil during the refining process, and with moderate damage to the stabilizing towers where petroleum is purged of sulfur. Restoring the pressure-reducing spheroids would require not much more than the installation of a series of temporary valves, eventually replaced by permanent ones. The storage tanks wouldn't be much of a problem either. A few repairs here and there, and you would have back full production capacity in no time at all. The stabilizing towers are another story. Sulfur and oil go hand in hand. The same eons-long processes that make one make the other. But until the sulfur is removed, petroleum is as good as useless. To get it from one state to the other, from sour to sweet, petroleum goes through a process known as hydrodesulfurization. At Abqaiq, hydrodesulfurization takes place in tall cylindrical towers. Inside the towers, hydrogen is introduced into the oil in sufficient quantities to convert sulfur into hydrogen sulfide gas, which then rises to the top of the structure where it is harvested and eventually rendered into harmless, environmentally safe, and usable sulfur. In the atmosphere, hydrogen sulfide reacts with moisture to create the acid sulfur dioxide. Once formed, the acid would rapidly settle on surrounding pipes, valve fittings, flanges, connectors, pump stations, and control boxes, and then begin eating its way through everything, and then everything else, like some bionic, omnivorous termite. But the initial release of hydrogen sulfide would have far greater effects because of what it does to humans. The Federal Agency for Toxic Research and Disease Registry, a division of the Centers for Disease Control, classifies hydrogen sulfide as a broad-spectrum poison. That is, it attacks multiple systems in the body. At the least, a moderate to severe attack on Abqaiq would slow average production there from 6.8 million barrels a day to roughly 1 million barrels for the first 2 months post-attack, a loss equivalent to just less than half of America's daily consumption of crude oil. Even as much as 7 months following an attack, Abqaiq output would still be about 40% of pre-attack output, as much as 4 million barrels below normal. Saudi Arabia's oil system is very target-rich. Any oil extraction, production, and delivery system relies on a large, mostly exposed exoskeleton. Add to that the topography of eastern Saudi Arabia, where the great oil fields are located, an ocean of sand broken by shifting dunes, all of it sloping gently into the Persian Gulf, and you end up with a security consultant's worst nightmare. Taking down Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure is like spearing fish in a barrel. It's not a question of opportunity. It's a question of how good your bang men are and what you give them to work with. If terrorists were to simultaneously hit only 5 sensitive points in Saudi Arabia's downstream oil system, it would be possible to put the Saudis out of the oil-producing business for about 2 years. The assessments by the disaster planners were mostly kept quiet for fear of rocking a global oil market. But you can bet they are not the only people to have calculated how much damage could be done to the Saudi petroleum chain or the global money chain by an expedient as relatively simple as blowing one of Abqaiq's stabilizing towers, or Ras Tanura's Platform 4, or the East-West Pipeline's Pump Station No. 1 to smithereens. Or, of course, all three. Promoters of Alaskan, Mexican Gulf, Caspian, and Siberian oil sound like a broken record when they point out that the United States has been weaning itself from Saudi oil. They argue that Saudi Arabia accounts for only 18% of U.S. crude oil consumption, down 10% in only a decade. They also argue that 3 of our 4 main oil suppliers are in the Western Hemisphere: Canada, Venezuela, and Mexico. True enough. But what they forget to mention is that Saudi Arabia sits on 25% of the world's proven reserve.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?